What I'm going to do in this video is show you that a creationist, which I happen to be, has the ability to refute any claims that the anti-creationists make regarding ages and dates. So when an anti-creationist says that they don't believe creation is true because they know for a fact that the Earth is billions and billions of years old, and so too the universe, this video will show you how to go about refuting their claims and show you that they don't have a foundation on which to stand.
While it is true that by the end of this video, VenomFangX will have shown that ages, dates, and arguments related to them do not disprove creationism, he will have merely done so in the process of showing that all knowledge is impossible. Granted, the conclusion he comes to is that all knowledge is impossible without God, but I can easily extend his premise to show that even the knowledge that he asserts is possible, in fact, isn't.
So let's try a little thought experiment. You're waiting at the shopping mall for your friend. You spot him, and he's walking at about 5 miles an hour, and you know for a fact that he lives on the other side of town. And based on the speed that he's presently observed to be walking, it must have taken him at least 12.5 hours to go from his home to the shopping mall at his current speed of walking. And so you go up to him and you say, "Man, you must be exhausted. You've been walking for such a long time." And your friend looks at you funny and says, "No, I've only been walking for about 30 seconds. And you're confused. "What do you mean? You live on the other side of town." And your friend says, "No, listen, I just got a car ride. It took 15 minutes to get here, and I just got out of the car about 30 seconds ago." And that just blows your mind, because you did the calculation. Your keen scientific and mathematical mind knew the distance between his home and the shopping mall, and you observed in the present the speed in which he was walking, and you still came to the wrong conclusion. You still came to the wrong conclusion. So what does that have to do with creation? Well, follow this. If God made the world about 6,000 years ago, and he made it in the way the book of Genesis portrays it, that he made an earth with the sun and the moon, the stars, the galaxies, with fish swimming in the seas and birds flying in the sky, and a full-grown man and a full-grown woman who were fully mature, able to get married and communicate and copulate, all in 6 days, well then, if you came to that creation on the 6th day, and you looked around and said, "You know what? That guy over there, that guy named Adam, he must be about 18 years old, because based on my observations in the present, I know it takes a human being about 18 years to reach that level of maturity. Therefore, he must be 18 years or older." You'd be wrong.
If the argument you were dealing with here, Venom, were that the Earth, the Sun, the stars, and humans would take billions of years to form naturally, therefore the Earth was billions of years old, you would be right in this refutation. The problem is that this isn't what's happening, because the critical difference between the sun, the stars, the earth, Adam and Eve, and the things that at least I would use to argue via ages and dates against a creationist is that the stars needed to be fully formed to perform their function, and the earth needed to be fully formed in order to provide a habitat for life. And some of that life needed to be full-grown in order to sustain some of that other life, as well as Adam and Eve, who would be much easier to work with if they were simply created as adults rather than being created as infants and God raising them. Unfortunately for you, you have to argue that the same thing is the case for all of the things that are in fact used to date various objects to older than 6,000 years.
And so too, every argument that the anti-creationists use is using the same kind of argumentation. They're using present-day observations and extrapolating that back into an indefinite past with no reverence or respect for any X factors or other possibilities, and then based on those assumptions that they're making, based on those calculations, they say they know for a fact that the Earth is billions of years old and therefore creation's not true. But they're assuming, of course, that creation is not true before they do any calculations.
No. What we're assuming is that if creationism is true, God will have made it appear to be so to the extent that was possible while each object still fulfilled the purpose he had for it. What is the particular point of making objects contain the ratio of various elements that would be expected if the Earth, in fact, were billions of years old.
Now, I can already hear the anti-creationists saying they don't assume that creation is true prior to their investigation to the date and ages of things because they have no reason to make that assumption. Okay? Well, then you shouldn't assume that it's false.
But as I already covered, we're not. What we're assuming is that if creationism is true, it will not be the case that the creation is made to look as if creationism were false. And given that God is said to be a rational being, it seems that he would only have the apparent age of something deviate from its actual age when there was an external reason to, meaning that in every case where something's apparent age deviates from what you believe its actual age to be, you have to explain what that reason may be.
You know, if you're going to come to any kind of conclusion, like in my shopping mall example, what you need to make sure is that you're factoring in all possible X factors. And we can't always do that, can we? Because what if there's an unknown X factor?
Indeed, because of the possibility of an unknown X factor, we can't ever do that. Meaning that we can't know anything. Because there could always be an argument against our position that we haven't considered or that hasn't occurred to us yet. There could always be an alternative explanation to whatever we try to explain with our own beliefs.
If you don't make that assumption on the outset, well then what you need to do is this. Let's take distant starlight. This one comes up a lot. So if I don't assume that creation is false prior to me looking at distant starlight, then what I'm going to try and do is explain distant starlight from a creation model as a possibility. And I can think of lots of ways. Maybe God sped up the speed of light. Maybe he made the light already in transit. Or maybe, there's other possibilities. And even if I can't think of another possibility, doesn't mean I've exhausted all options.
While I personally am not a large fan of the distant starlight problem, simply because the stars need to be visible from Earth in order to have utility, I'm assuming that you would probably apply the exact same argument you just made to all or almost all dating methods, some of which I do agree with, as arguments against creationism. Therefore, I'm curious to know, VenomFangX, what would you feel like were I to apply the logic you just applied to ages and dates to, for example, the argument that irreducibly complex objects cannot evolve naturally? Can you honestly say that you've accounted for every single X factor, that you've thought of and debunked every single way that an irreducibly complex organism might be able to evolve? How can you say that you have, when there could be a method that you have not thought of yet?
Because, let's face it, I'm not all-knowing, so there is maybe a possibility that there is an alternate explanation than what I'm giving, and as long as I'm open to that, I can't emphatically say with certainty that I know for a fact that starlight is the result of millions and billions of years based on my calculations of the speed of light in the present.
And likewise, you can't say with certainty that the bacterial flagellum is the result of a naturalistic creation until you've ruled out every single evolutionary explanation, including the ones you have not thought of yet. And indeed, this argument that you are presenting actually shows not just that it's impossible to argue against creationism with ages and dates, despite the fact that you say that that's where you're going to mostly focus your video, it actually makes it impossible to argue against almost anything in any way.
I can't know that for a fact because I haven't factored in all the possible X factors. There might be unknowns that I don't know because I'm not all-knowing. And so long as that's a possibility, we have a shopping mall situation. We have the anti-creationists making assumptions, and most of them aren't aware that they're doing this.
What I am assuming, Venom, is that God is not whimsical and arbitrary in nature. He only would make an arbitrary decision when there is no unarbitrary decision that is possible. It seems non-arbitrary to me to avoid allowing the Earth to appear as if it could have, and in fact did, form naturally over billions of years, unless, of course, naturalistic processes were involved in the creation of the Earth. But Venom Fang X doesn't believe that.
And that assumption, the assumption that creation is not true, without making any appeal to even the possibility of God, in the academic world, it begins in high school. God's not mentioned in the science classes as even a possibility. Then they go to college, same thing, it's reinforced, this anti-creationist position, and then they go into the academic field. The entire academic world has largely, unanimously, if one can agree, that the rejection of God is a primary assumption prior to doing the scientific endeavors on which they're going about.
Do you think that Francis Collins would agree with the statement that you just made? I highly doubt it. Francis Collins is a theistic evolutionist and a scientist. He's very famous because he's behind the Human Genome Project that sequenced the human genome. Don't you sit there and imply that almost every scientist who accepts evolution also rejects the existence of God, as if the majority of Christians, that is, theistic evolutionists, don't exist.
And thus, why should we be surprised that their conclusions are also of an anti-creationist, anti-God nature? It's because they're assuming it, to begin with.
Even if you believe my conclusions as a theistic evolutionist are unbiblical, you cannot argue, Venom, you simply cannot argue that I am coming to a conclusion that rules out or commits an assault on the existence of God. At least not directly, anyway. Perhaps you could go for evolutionary suffering, but that, I hope you understand, is a topic to be saved for its own video.
Another problem the anti-creationists have is they make no distinction between observational and historical sciences. Now, what they want to do is say that our present observations are the key to unlocking our understanding of certainty of the indefinite past. And what is the justification for that? They're going to appeal to their observations in the present and the recent past to tell us what they claim they know for certain about the indefinite past.
Here we see Venom continuing in his crusade to, rather than actually addressing directly the scientific arguments against a young Earth, argue that we can't know anything about the past, at least not by the scientific method. What does it say about your position, Venom? If knowledge is so dangerous to it that a significant part of your strategy in defending it is to try to make knowledge in the relevant fields as difficult to acquire as you can. And I do have to give you, Venom, you have successfully made it completely impossible. Which is why I cannot accept your line of argumentation here.
But that's circular reasoning. You can't use the recent past and the present to tell me about the indefinite past if I'm asking you what your justification is for using the recent past and the present as your means of unlocking with certainty your knowledge of the indefinite past.
It would only be circular reasoning if, as is not occurring, our side was trying to argue that the recent past tells us about the indefinite past because the recent past tells us about the indefinite past. I challenge you to find a single person ever arguing like that. A single anti-creationist, that is.